Charles Dickens was weeks away from total financial ruin when he decided to gamble his last remaining pennies on a ghost story. He didn't just want to save his bank account. He wanted to declare war on the very empire that was starving its own children. This wasn't a holiday fable. It was a desperate 6-week sprint to stop a revolution by changing the human heart. The city Dickens navigated was a place of extreme, jagged contrasts, a landscape where the black soot of industrial progress choked the lungs of the destitute, while the wealthy sat behind reinforced mahogany doors. Charles Dickens was 31 years old, and despite the earlier success of the Pickwick Papers and Oliver Twist, he was a man standing on the edge of a precipice. His latest serialized novel, Martin Chuzzlewit, was failing to capture the public's imagination, and his bank account was draining faster than the Thames at low tide. He was a creator in crisis, a man whose brand was collapsing just as his family was expanding. He had a large family to support, a father whose eccentricities often led back to debt, and a deep-seated fear that the specter of the Marshalsea debtors' prison, the place that had swallowed his childhood, was returning to claim him once again. But Dickens's anxiety was not merely financial, it was moral. Earlier that year, he had read a government report on the labor of children in mines and factories, a document filled with accounts of 7-year-olds working 12-hour shifts in total darkness, their bodies twisted by the weight of coal carts. He originally intended to write a searing political essay titled An Appeal to the People of England on behalf of the poor man's child. But he paused. He knew that the Victorian middle class, comfortable in their parlours, would likely ignore a dry pamphlet. To truly change the world, he needed to capture its heart. He needed to create a myth. In October, while visiting the industrial powerhouse of Manchester, the idea struck him with the force of a physical blow. He would write a ghost story. He began to walk the streets of London at night, sometimes covering 15 to 20 miles in a single session, his mind racing through the fog-drenched alleys of the East End. If you're enjoying this journey into Dickens's world, give this video a like. It helps us bring more literary stories to life. He later described how he wept and laughed and wept again as he developed the characters, his imagination so vivid that he felt the spirits were actually walking beside him in the freezing mist. He was writing with a feverish intensity, finishing the entire manuscript in just 6 weeks. He insisted on high-quality production for the book: red cloth, binding, gilt-edged pages, and hand-colored illustrations, believing that the physical beauty of the volume should reflect the warmth of its message. This was a time of the New Poor Law, a cold piece of legislation that effectively criminalized poverty by making the conditions in workhouses more miserable than the lowest-paid labor outside of them. Dickens saw this as a betrayal of the basic Christian tenets of charity and fellowship. He observed the rise of the grim idea that the poor were simply a surplus population that should be allowed to succumb to famine to keep the economy in balance. In an age of algorithms and bottom-line obsession, this is the shadow we all fear becoming. As he wrote, he wasn't just creating a story for Christmas. He was engaging in a desperate act of cultural surgery. He was attempting to remove the cold heart of the era and replace it with something that could actually beat with empathy. He poured his own trauma into the ink. He remembered the humiliation of the blacking warehouse, where, as a boy, he had pasted labels on bottles of shoe polish while his family sat in prison. That wound had never truly healed, and it acted as the fuel for his narrative fire. By the time he reached the final pages in early December, he was exhausted and broke, having paid for the publication costs himself. He stood at the center of a London that was indifferent to his struggle, unaware that he held a small red book that would soon redefine the very concept of human kindness. He had set the stage for a haunting, but the first ghost to appear would not be a spirit of Christmas, but the ghost of a man who had forgotten how to be human. Ebenezer Scrooge was not born of ink and paper, but of the cold, hard reality of 19th century greed. Dickens hunted for the worst traits of every miser he knew and stitched them into Scrooge's skin, creating a composite of the men he loathed, the bankers and industrialists who believed that poverty was a character flaw. To Dickens, Scrooge represented the ultimate endpoint of a life lived entirely for the self, a man who had become so obsessed with the ledger of life that he had lost the ability to read the poetry of existence. The opening of the story is famous for its insistence that Marley was deceased to begin with, a hook that establishes the necessity of passing away for the possibility of rebirth. Scrooge is described as a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, a string of verbs that move like a closing fist. Dickens didn't just want the reader to dislike Scrooge, he wanted them to feel the temperature drop whenever he entered a room. The inspiration for the name may have come from a gravestone Dickens saw in Edinburgh for a man named Ebenezer Scrooge, whose epitaph identified him as a meal man or corn merchant. Dickens, in the fading light, misread it as mean man, and the seed of the character was planted. The character was also a mirror for the legendary miser John Elwes, a member of Parliament who would go to bed in the dark to save the cost of a candle and eat putrid meat rather than buy fresh food. Dickens took these historical fragments and infused them with a chilling, internal logic. Scrooge is a man who has iced his own heart, believing that the only things of value are those that can be counted, weighed, or traded. He is the personification of the calculated age, a man who views the world through the narrow lens of profit and loss, seeing even his clerk, Bob Cratchit, as nothing more than a drain on his overhead. If this analysis of Scrooge's dark psychology is opening your eyes to Dickens's genius, please leave a comment below, sharing which character from the Carol has always resonated with you most. Dickens structured the book in 5 sections, making the story feel communal and ancient, even as it addressed the pressing issues of 1843. When Jacob Marley appears, he's draped in chains forged from cash boxes, keys, padlocks, and heavy purses. These chains are not just a ghost story trope. They are the physical weight of a life spent in the service of the market. The chains are a self-imposed weight, the result of a million small choices to prioritize business over people. The atmosphere of the counting house, where Scrooge sits by a fire so small it looks like a single coal, is a psychological prison. He lives in a house that belonged to his deceased partner, a place of shadows and stairs, where the very architecture seems to shrink away from his coldness. He is a man who has successfully isolated himself from the common passage of humanity, viewing the world as an intruder upon his solitude. He represents the danger of a society that forgets its interconnectedness, a theme that Dickens felt was the most urgent crisis of his day. Yet, as Scrooge hurls his insults at his nephew and scoffs at the charity collectors, he's unaware that his isolation is about to be shattered. The ticking of the clock in his chamber is no longer measuring time. It is counting down to an encounter with the impossible. He believed he had calculated the cost of everything, but he had failed to account for the value of his own soul. The bell in the high, forgotten tower begins to toll, and as the echoes fade away, the air in the room begins to shimmer with the arrival of the first of 3 shadows. The arrival of the 3 spirits transformed a simple moral tale into a journey through the 4th dimension. These were not the ethereal angels of Victorian Sunday schools, but visceral, unsettling manifestations of memory, gluttony, and inevitable decay. The ghost of Christmas past is an enigma of light and shadow, representing the fluctuating and often painful nature of our own histories. It forces Scrooge to look back at the lonely boy he once was, a child left at school while others went home for the holidays. This is a crucial moment of empathy. Dickens shows that the monster was made, not born. As they travel through the corridors of his youth, we see the end of life of his sister Fan and the slow cooling of his relationship with his fiancée, Belle. The past is shown as a series of missed opportunities where the pursuit of gold slowly displaced the capacity for love. When Belle tells him that a golden idol has replaced her, she is articulating the tragedy of the Victorian middle class, the trade of human warmth for material security. Scrooge tries to extinguish the light of the spirit with its own cap, but the memory cannot be suppressed. The light leaks out, proving that the past is never truly gone. Then comes the ghost of Christmas present, a jolly giant who represents the abundance of the world that Scrooge refuses to see. But this spirit carries a dark secret. Beneath his robes hide two wretched children, ignorance and want. They are yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish. And the spirit warns that on their brows is written, doom. This is the warning Dickens wrote for us. He was shouting to his readers that if society ignored the welfare of the poor, those children would eventually grow into the monsters that would tear the empire down. This section of the story introduces us to the Cratchit household, where Dickens uses the frail figure of Tiny Tim to humanize the statistics of the surplus population. Tim is not just a character, he is a moral test. If the audience finds the story fascinating enough to tell a friend, please share this video. It helps the channel reach more people who love literature as much as you do. Dickens forces Scrooge to watch the family's meager celebration, where a small goose is treated like a feast, and the love between them is a wealth that Scrooge's millions cannot buy. The spirit throws Scrooge's own words back at him. If he would like to get rid of himself, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. The movement through these spirits creates a mounting sense of urgency. Scrooge is no longer just an observer. He is a man whose psychological defenses are being systematically dismantled. He is seeing the shadows of things that have been, and the shadows of things that are, and the weight of his own indifference is becoming unbearable. The sensory detail, the smell of the roasting chestnuts, the sound of the children's laughter, the cold wind on the moors, is designed to wake the reader's senses as much as Scrooge's. But the most terrifying figure in English literature does not speak a single word. Shrouded in black, the ghost of Christmas, yet to come, points its skeletal finger not just at a headstone, but at the terrifying possibility of a life that left no mark upon the world. This spirit is the personification of the future that we are all building with our present actions. It takes Scrooge to the old Joe rag and bottle shop, a place of filth and misery, where the scavengers strip the very curtains from his final days. You can almost smell the rot in the room as they hawk his last possessions. There is no dignity in this passing. There is only the cold, hard reality of being unwatched, unwept, uncared for. Dickens leans into the gothic horror of the scene, showing a body covered by a sheet in a dark room, a body that Scrooge is too terrified to uncover. He watches as the businessmen on the street joke about the funeral, wondering if there will be a lunch provided. This is the ultimate irony for a man who lived for his reputation. In the end, he is nothing more than a momentary topic of trivial conversation. The climax in the churchyard, where Scrooge wipes the snow from the gravestone to read his own name, is one of the most powerful rebirth sequences in all of literature. Scrooge's plea is not for his life, but for the chance to sponge away the writing on this stone. He realizes that the future is not a fixed destination, but a possibility that can be changed by a transformation of the heart. When he wakes up on Christmas morning, the lightness he feels, "I am as light as a feather, I am as happy as an angel," is the physical relief of a man who has escaped a tomb. He's no longer the mean man Dickens misread on the grave. He is a man who has been reauthored by his own conscience. The story concludes with a transformation that is both personal and cultural. Scrooge becomes a second father to Tiny Tim, and Dickens notes that Tim did not pass away. This is the ultimate what-if stakes. The tragedy was preventable. By changing his heart, Scrooge changed the world around him. This narrative arc provided a template for the Victorian public, showing them that the solution to their crisis was not just legislation, but a radical, individual commitment to the well-being of one's neighbour. In 1843, Christmas was a fading holiday, a quiet, religious affair eclipsed by the soot of the Industrial Revolution. But when Dickens published his Little Carol, he didn't just write a bestseller. He effectively codified the modern secular Christmas of charity, family, and the spirit of the heart. The book was an immediate sensation, selling out its first 6,000 copies in days. More importantly, it had a tangible impact on society. In early 1844, charitable giving in London saw a noticeable spike, and several factory owners, moved by the story, closed their shops on Christmas Day for the first time. Dickens had achieved his goal. He had created a myth that was more powerful than a pamphlet. He had taken the cold, industrial winter and filled it with the warmth of a carol. The book saved his career and established him as the inimitable Dickens, the voice of the English people. He began a series of public readings of the story that would span the rest of his life, often performing it with such emotional intensity that he would collapse afterward. He gave the world the imagery we still associate with the holiday: the snow, the turkey, the mistletoe, and the gathered family, drawing from his own memories of a rare snowy childhood in Kent. The legacy of Carol is unparalleled. It has never been out of print. It has been adapted into every conceivable medium, from silent film to opera to animation. Yet its core remains untouched. It survives because it addresses a fundamental human fear, the fear of a wasted life, and offers a universal hope that it is never too late to change. It is a story that proves that while the calculated age may try to reduce us to numbers, the human spirit is something that can never be fully balanced on a ledger. God bless us, everyone. The final line given to Tiny Tim remains the radical heart of the work. Dickens passed away in 1871, but he left behind a weapon disguised as a gift. Every time we choose empathy over the ledger, we prove that the surplus population doesn't exist. The question isn't whether Scrooge changed, it's whether we will, because the ghosts are still walking, and the third spirit is still pointing toward a future we haven't written yet. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the history and heart of Charles Dickens's most famous work. The story of how A Christmas Carol came to be is almost as compelling as the tale itself. A desperate man with everything to lose, who gambled on the power of fiction to change the world, and won. If you found this exploration compelling, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to join our community of bibliophiles. Your engagement, your likes, comments, and shares helps us continue to bring these classic stories to life and ensures we can keep exploring the urgent, revolutionary origins of the books we think we know. Remember, Dickens didn't just give us a Christmas story, he gave us a mirror, and the question he's still asking us across 180 years is simple. What will you do with the time you have left? Thank you for watching. See you in the next chapter of Great Books Explained.